when you put the context around their emotions and their feelings and their background with money and finances, that will help you understand why they are the way they are. And that is what you need in order to execute on those goals.
It also allows you to provide empathy as far as, like she's saying, why is your partner doing certain things? But then also looking at the good things that they're doing and continuing those.
And celebrating those.
Hey, Journeyers. Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast. This week, I have on Jessica and Brandon Norwood, who are the dynamic duo behind the Sugar Daddy podcast, a financial literacy podcast dedicated to helping millennials build wealth and break down the stigma around money conversations. As a married elder millennial couple, I love that word, that elder millennial, their mission is to empower you to take control of your finances so you can live the life you've always dreamed of. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica and Brandon.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited. And Brandon was, before we pressed record, was showing me how to work my recording system that we both use. And I always like to tell people, this is why I say you can do anything you want to, because people think that I've been doing this podcast for so long that I have it all together. And my setup is so basic and hot mess. And look at me. I'll make it work. So you can too.
Progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly. Okay, so I always like to start kind of bit from the beginning. I mean, I know you guys now are established with your podcast and brand and still growing and talking about money together, but I want to take it back to almost your like individual origin stories, not to stay there too long, but just then how you both were raised in terms of money, where you're from, and then meeting, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I'll start. So I grew up in Germany. My mom's German. My dad's Black. He's from Florida. But we grew up in Germany, in Bavaria, until I was 10. And so kind of had that culture shock of coming over at 10, starting 5th grade in the US, and have been here ever since. Growing up, my dad was the primary breadwinner, and my mom managed all the money. And so that was the dynamic that I grew up with. And then in my late 20s, my parents, after 35 years of marriage, ended up getting a divorce. And I kind of started seeing what that does to a family. And now my mom, who was planning on being retired at this age, is still working so that she has health care. And, those are just things that I'm starting to see more and more of, and that I very quickly realized, I want to avoid that. I do not want to be in that kind of a position. So I kind of took that and ran with it, in the sense that I wanted to always make my own money, be financially secure and independent, regardless of being married or not married. I will have a hand in making my money, managing the money, and growing my money. And so that's the high level. I mean, we can dig into into the details there, but that's kind of that origin story.
Okay, love that. And you, Brandon?
So my parents actually got divorced when I was 5, and my mom raised my brother and I. And my dad really wasn't around when I was younger, so it was mainly my mom, obviously. And I was fortunate enough, though, that in that scenario where often money tends to be an issue, my mom was a college professor. She did very well for herself. Money was never an issue. She had a financial advisor at a young, when I was a child, great at budgeting money. So it was never really an issue. And also, growing up with my mom, obviously being the one taking care of us, I was accustomed to, an educated woman that's, taking care of everything as far as the money, everything of that nature. So when Jess and I got together, that wasn't necessarily something that was new to me as far as being with a strong woman, because that's kind of what I've always experienced. And, money was talked about in our house to a certain extent, but I wouldn't say to the extent that we talk about money in our household.
Okay. So one thing I didn't mention, Brandon, is that you are a licensed financial planner with over a decade of experience. And so I think your dynamic with Jessica, who it's in your bio, it says you're actually the sugar daddy, which I want to get into more of. I just want to add that context, just because I think there's that validity and that technical side that you have the license behind talking about finance in a way. That some of us in the personal finance space just don't have, because we don't have that designation. And then going back to your comment, so you said something, and then my wheels started turning, because I do want to explore this a bit, because we're talking about relationships and money, and in a kind of traditional, I guess, relationship, like it's also not uncommon for me and in my marriage that I am the person who is leading the charge when it comes to money and conversations about money. And my husband, from what I mean, we've been together for a long time. I don't think he has a problem with it. He's happy to let me take the reins. And I went back to thinking about how he was raised, because you mentioned having like a strong mother that you seem to, respect and love. And I think for him, his mother was also the force in the household. And I think they have a good relationship. I don't think he resented her for that. And I think that carried over to his adult relationship and him being comfortable and not feeling emasculated, that I'm the one that's, more on it when it comes to money. So I wonder if you have thoughts on that, because sometimes I think in our society or in our world nowadays, it's like y'all look at stories or people that say, oh, like the man should be making the decisions, or men don't like to feel emasculated and then they want to like be the head of the household, which I think there is, you can be the head of the household. That's fine. We could both like kind of rule together. But what do you think about that? Do you see like a tie in between like the couples that you talk to or the people that follow you in terms of when a man is not comfortable with the woman being more just aggressive or dominant, more confident in finances versus not, and their upbringing with their mother?
Well, I would say for me, my clients are probably not the norm because they tend to kind of mirror myself and Jess. So I would say that most of the time it's actually the woman that's kind of reaching out to me to initiate the planning relationship. And then I would also say that they kind of lead the conversations in regards to some of the decisions being made. Now, both are present, but I would definitely say that I would say women, as far as my client basis, kind of lead the push. Now, I think things are changing in the sense of, I think for the longest time, men were told that the only way that they really, they bring something to the table for their family is by providing.
Monetarily.
Providing monetarily. I think that was what we've always been told. And that is changing because one, just the dynamics of the relationships as far as money in the household is changing. But then also the reality is that things cost significantly more. So you kind of do need two incomes nowadays in order for most people to get by. So that dynamic does change. And I think men really need to understand that there's a lot more things that they can bring to the table rather than just money itself.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to also like some of the social media posts or just the younger kids nowadays. And when they're talking about dating and money and the things that they will require from a man, like that, they pay for everything. And I'm just like, how, like, that's not like, to me, that's not realistic unless your partner, the man, is like making hundreds or millions of like dollars. But like the average person, like you're not, unless we're talking about like the very prudent and frugal like lifestyle, is not going to be able to carry like you, like another person and kids. Yeah, so I'm always like, wait, that's not reality.
I will put this like little caveat though. I think if that's what you want and you find a partner that wants that also, then that's great. Because the one thing that we do is that we never tell people how their relationship should be. It's just a matter of that you and your partner should be on the same page as far as how your relationship is going to move forward.
But I actually have an issue with that, and we've done an episode on it because, if you want the actual sugar daddy, right? If you want to be at home, work out, maintain the home, cook dinners, and that's your job, I don't want to diminish that in any way. Stay-at-home moms, that is the hardest job on the planet. Now, if you're a stay-at-home girlfriend and there's no kids, I'm giving you the side eye. But what I do want to say and call out is that if that dynamic works for you, you should still put things in place to help secure your retirement. Because what happens if you're in that relationship, and I'm just going to, make a kind of blanket statement. If you're the one being cared for, right, and you're keeping up appearances and you're that trophy girlfriend, trophy wife, at some point, are you going to get traded in for a younger model? And then what? You have no skills. You have no work history. Do you have a retirement? Do you have a savings account? What does your money look like? And then are you going to be, maybe forced in a sense of getting into another relationship just so somebody else can take care of you because you weren't willing to take care of yourself? So I do think as women, we have a responsibility to ourselves to make sure that our money is right. Our bank account looks the way it needs to so that we can leave a negative situation, whether it's a negative toxic workplace or a negative toxic relationship or a dangerous relationship. If you cannot do that on your own because you are relying on a man, that is not a good position to be in.
Yeah, and unless you have a very evolved partner, and I mean, that can mean a bunch of things. That is the one that is the breadwinner and is bringing home most of the money. They more than likely then have more of a say in how things go, unless they are going to be really fair and recognize the value that you bring. Because, like you said, there are a lot of things that someone can bring to the table other than money. That is important to help a household run. But I just think that a lot of times that's not the case for a lot of people, depending on the ages you meet and how just their experiences, past experiences. But I do want to talk a little bit about you merging and coming together. Did you guys have any issues starting? Because Jessica, I would love to kind of go into your background a bit because I know you worked in corporate America, and was it easy to get on sync because of your different backgrounds? Because I know some couples, it's not easy. It's like it's a struggle to get to the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first started dating, I was actually in teaching, so our salaries were probably very equal, all things considered. And then when I moved and we got married, I switched into the tech sector, which is where I still am. So I do still work full time, corporate girly. I like my 401k and my match and all those things. It also gives us health insurance. I know that's something you talk a lot about with your husband. Like, there's something about being an entrepreneur that's really intriguing, but it's also very expensive in some areas. And so by me still being in that corporate life, we have insurance for the family and those things. So once I transitioned into tech is when my salary, doubled, tripled, et cetera. And then that's when that dynamic, it was nice for the house, right? Like we're taking more vacations, we're doing more home upgrades, things like that. But we were in our late 20s, early 30s when we got married. And so we owned homes. We had been paying our bills for a long time. We were really merging two full and very complete lives. And so we had the conversation. I ended up selling one of my homes, moved into his house. And I basically said, listen, what's the deal? Because if I'm paying rent, right, that's going towards your mortgage. I have no equity in this. What happens when we sell? What happens to this furniture I'm bringing in? What's the expectation for home improvements? I think because we're both products of divorce, him at a young age and me in my adulthood, we had these tough conversations very early, and he knew how I felt. He knew what was going on with my parents. He knew the financial constraints that my mom was going to be in because of the divorce. And so when I came to him and I said, listen, I'm just not going to pay your mortgage and not get anything for it. If this relationship doesn't work and I've been pouring into your mortgage, what's that going to look like for me, right? And so we had those conversations early and often, and he knew because of my background exactly where I was coming from. So we tackled those tough things very head on and very early.
All right, well, now we need to know what was the decision? Like how did you make yourself feel equal, or what did you come to in that?
Well, I would say I would say taking a step back, the first thing that I did since she was, uprooting her life per se in Columbia, South Carolina, and then moving into, the townhouse that I owned, I let her do whatever she wanted to do as far as decorating.
Full redo.
Full redo as far as, making it feel as though it was ours and not mine, and she's coming in and living there. So if you walked into the house, when I was a single guy in comparison to when she moved in, it was night and day. So I
Yeah.
think that was the first step that, made her feel more as this is our home and not just my home.
Yeah, that was big. We did talk about the financial implications. If the relationship wouldn't have progressed the way it did, what does that look like? Is there a percentage that I would get back? Is there money that you would pay me for painting all these horrible red and brown colors that were painted on these walls? I brought in new furniture, we sold the old furniture. And so, I won't say that we had a ledger or an Excel spreadsheet of this is the money I put in and that, but I do think that people should and could do that, right? You have a monetary contribution that you're making to technically somebody else's home. So having some sort of an agreement in place of what does this look like if you sell? What does it look like if we sell? Is there some sort of an agreement of, hey, the relationship's not working out? How long before I need to move out, right? Are you just going to kick me out? I'm going to be on the street. Do I have 30 days? Do I have 60 days? I can move into the spare bedroom and it can be awkward for a little bit. Whatever those rules are that you want to put in place, that's up to you and your partner, but talk about it and figure it out, because there are instances where you're pouring into somebody else's home. You're not on the mortgage. You're not on the deed. You have no stake in that property. They turn around and sell it for a profit, and you're not making a dime. So whatever you decide, you make the rules, but talk about it and put something in place. Because you can have like a renter's agreement even between, if you're not married, and get it notarized, have somebody sign it, have an attorney look over it, because you want to have some sort of protection. Again, especially as the woman in like a heteronormative relationship.
Granted, she also made it very well known the approximate time frame that we would be dating before she was expecting a ring. And I think I missed it by 10 days only because I was waiting for the ring to come.
Yeah.
So
not like an ultimatum,
it was
but we
2
weren't going to be
years.
dating
It
for
was 2
forever.
years and 10 days when I proposed.
Yeah.
I love that. That's like mindset of a woman who knows like what she wants and her worth. And I just feel like hopefully I have whether it's friends or siblings and people in my life that are currently kind of dating and figuring things out themselves. And they always tell me like I don't know what it's like because I've been married. So and I don't know, like I'm not in a dating world right now, but I just love this idea of being like confident and rooted like into who you are. And this goes for the man or woman and what you expect. And not, it doesn't have to be like a sit down business like you are telling the person what to do, but you're just saying, here are my expectations. Here is some things that are concerning me. How are we going to talk about this? And I think a very good indicator on if this is a partner that is worthy of you is how they respond to you just bringing things up that are logical. Like this is something that if
100%.
you like, this is something I should be asking questions about. So we should have a conversation about this.
We had something very
Absolutely.
interesting. We kind of like came to agreement on a couple weeks ago was that people always say love should be unconditional. And we say love between you and your spouse is conditional.
100%.
It's conditional upon them treating you the way that you should be treated.
Yeah,
It
you got
shouldn't
to
be
act right
unconditional.
for me to love you. Now, my children, that's a different kind of love, right? But
Yeah.
I married you under, the condition that you treat me with respect, you value me, I am your priority, etc. So if that changes, if there's a shift, then yeah, that love's going to go away. So, I mean, I get the sentiment behind love is unconditional, but it is not.
It's unconditional in terms of the non priority or the things that you can compromise on, right? Like certain things where it's like, okay, maybe I don't know, physical appearance changes because you had a kid, or just there are things to me that yes, like we're gonna compromise on that, or I'm gonna let that go just because we are evolving together over the years. Like that is like yes, but the like you said, the foundational things like being able to trust you, and ultimately we may not always get it right in the how we like communicate or what we're saying, but I know you respect me. Like the foundational stuff to me that like there is, like you said, I don't like there's no compromise on that. Like what are we doing? All right.
Yeah.
So, Jessica, one thing you mentioned in your origin story was that you were a teacher and then you switched to tech, which increased your income by a lot. And I want to talk about that because I think your transition and any tips you can give how that happened would be very helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a full episode on how to transition out of teaching because I think it's such an important topic and people ask me all the time, and I've helped friends transition out of teaching as well. But I think one of the main things to do is to start networking early and often. As a former teacher, you stay in that teacher bubble and you go to your teacher conferences and you go to your teacher workshops, but you really need to start thinking about where do you want to potentially end up? Do you want to be in tech? Do you want to be in customer success? Do you want to be in consulting? What does that future life of yours look like? And start going out and meeting people in those fields, going to meetup groups, going to, your alumni chapter events to meet people that are in those spaces, getting on LinkedIn. That's a huge miss. If you get on LinkedIn and look up any of your teacher friends, it's very likely that they are not there. And they need to be, building out that professional presence and that professional profile, making yourself open to recruiters and getting really crystal clear on what is it that you want to do professionally. I think too many teachers undervalue their skill sets and their expertise. You are project managing, you are forecasting, you are building out curriculum, you're doing learning and design. I mean, there are so many things that you're doing on a day to day, and you're not giving yourself enough credit for the things that you're doing. And so instead of saying, oh, I'm just a teacher, no, I'm a project manager, I'm a counselor, I'm a compliance officer, I'm a learning and development coach. Really get into the nitty gritty of what your day to day looks like. And then think about, what do you want your day to be? If you're teaching and you're in a classroom, you're going into a building every day and you like that community feel, working remote in a tech job might feel really isolating to you. You might go stir crazy. You might not want to work from home. So even thinking of something as simple as, do I want to be in an office? Do I want to be hybrid? Do I want to be remote? That's really important, because that's going to be setting up your quality of life. And then, making sure that you're leaning into the parts of your current role as a teacher that you really like. Do you like that curriculum part? Do you like grading papers? Do you like meeting with the parents? Do you like training incoming teachers? There's so many directions that you can take your teaching career. I just want teachers to understand you are not limited, but you do need to expand your network and you do need to be intentional. It's a really tough market. So starting on this early, right? You can't just say, all right, I finished out my contract, it's the summer, and by fall, I'm going to be in tech. That's very unlikely. So being realistic with your timeline, what do your finances look like? Are you willing to maybe, quote unquote, take a step back so that you can take a leap forward, understanding that you're starting in a new industry, you're getting your feet wet in a new sector? You might have to make some sacrifices. So what will that look like? And is your family able to sustain that change? So digging into those details, I think, is really important.
And then I would assume for some people, especially if they spend a little bit of time in that field and teaching where they have a pension, that walking away from that is like very scary, or they can't do it. So what are some considerations on how someone should be looking at that if they do have a pension they don't want to leave?
Yeah, I think I'll give my answer and then I'll let Brandon say his. Having a pension is fantastic. I think having a high income and opportunities for big bonuses, for stocks, sometimes those help bridge the gap. So I certainly would never encourage somebody who's 2 or 3 years away from, collecting their pension to all of a sudden make that change into tech. No, write it out. Do your time, collect your pension, and then you can always pivot. But if you're like me, I left at after my 7th year, and so it was really one of those points where the kind of inside joke is, after 10 years, you stay. So I knew I needed to get out before that decade mark. And so my retirement at that point, my 403B, it didn't have very much in it. I was just surviving, And so for me, walking away, knowing that I could have a big increase in my earning potential, I didn't look back. But if you're close to that pension and you're close to retirement, I certainly would say ride it out, because a pension is so rare these days.
I mean, you said what I was going to say as far as how far away are you from, full pension for the retirement aspect? Also, the thing is, too, is that most of the time with those pensions, if you leave teaching, you might have an option to roll over a portion of the money that you've already had contributed to those accounts. But you might want to actually just leave it there. Because if you get out of teaching and for whatever reason you try something different, you don't like it, you miss it, you want to go back to teaching, I believe with a lot of areas, if you keep the money there, then they'll just basically continue your time on from when you had stopped teaching to when you start again. Because if you actually move the money, sometimes that erases that. So if you were to go back to teaching, you're starting from day one again. So you do want to understand the language and the rules around those different types of accounts before making any decisions on what to do with them.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, with the two of you, you both are working. Well, so Brandon, you're an entrepreneur essentially with your own
Yes.
financial planning business. And Jessica, I can't believe you still work in corporate America full time. And now you have this online business. And you guys have kids. How many kids do you have?
2, 6 and
Two.
5.
Okay. Okay. So with that, I mean, you're very busy, the two of you. I want to explore or talk about just how you're managing your decisions to take on more. So like starting Sugar Daddy podcast and the brand, right? On top of everything that you're already doing. Like for you guys, how did you weigh the pros and cons of that? Because I'd imagine that you're very busy, but maybe there are some things that are, if you're working from home or you have more flexibility, like that helps versus if you're commuting into a job. But I just love to dig into that more and then talk more about like the income side of things. Like, what is the enough point to where this is like too much? And is it ever too much for you? And I want to relax a bit more, just enjoy the fruits of our labor versus doing all this work. So I know that was a lot, but
Yeah, let's get into it. So we have two kids. Yes, very busy. It absolutely helps to work from home. I wouldn't even consider a job at this point where I have to spend an hour commuting both ways twice a day. I mean, that is just such precious time. So we both work from home. My office is downstairs, his office is upstairs, kind of talking about like the modern man, if you will. You know, Brandon does drop off and pick up. 99% of the time, the teachers very rarely see my face. He gets to make his own schedule. I don't as much. And so, him being the consistent person for that is really helpful. You know, as far as home chores, you know, he's unloading the dishwasher, he's also doing the laundry. I mean, all of that helps in kind of keeping everything going. I will say we watch very little TV. It's work, the podcast, and social media, which you know is a full-time job. We haven't outsourced any of it yet. We're getting there. But as far as managing our finances, I mean, it really is just an all hands on deck approach. Again, because when we merged our lives, we were used to paying our own bills. You know, we just kind of decided, all right, let's put this bill on this credit card so we can get these points, and, you know, I'll pay that off, and then you take the light bill. And we didn't necessarily do it based on a percentage. If we really look at the breakdown, I'm paying more of the bills because I'm the higher earner. But at the end of the day, we envision the money that is coming in to our home, our money. So it's never my money, my paycheck. It's always our money, our paycheck. And you pick up where you need to. You know, him as an entrepreneur, his income fluctuates. He could be onboarding multiple clients in 1 month, which is awesome for us. And then he might have a lull, right? So it really, I again find comfort in my stability, right? I find comfort in getting 26 paychecks a year, having that health insurance, having that 401k match. That is where I live in my comfort zone. He's able to do what he does because I have the consistent income no matter what. As far as being, you know, what's enough? I mean, we're trying to be work optional in the next 8 to 10 years. And that's just because we'll have teenagers at that time and we want to be able to fully be there for whatever they need. You know, if it's travel, setting up the dorm room, whatever it is, we want to be able to drop whatever it is we're doing and always prioritize our kids and our family. So that's the ultimate goal, 8 to 10 years to be work optional.
And as far as the podcast was 100% her idea. I had no intentions of, you know, starting a podcast, never thought about it. And she had a dream and came up with the name and the concept, had actually written it down, forgot about it for a few weeks, and then brought it up to me. And the idea kind of came from is that, you know, she's in meetings all day and she's actually leading a lot of the meetings. So, you know, at the end of the day, she's spent. And I would be like, oh, you know, I want to talk about this, talk about that. And it's different, you know, finance topics and whatnot or things that have happened. And she's like, you need to put this on social media. And I was like, well, that doesn't work for me because I'm very long winded and social media doesn't really work that well, you know, for long winded individuals. And that's where the idea of the podcast came from, because I definitely would not have done one by myself.
He needed a new outlet that wasn't me at the end of a long day of work. And I said, do a newsletter, do the post, get on TikTok. And if you know Brandon at all, that's just not how he operates. And so the podcast was a perfect way for him to get his personality out there, get his expertise out there, help the Black and brown community, right? That's what we always set out to do, is help empower our community to help build wealth, right? We lose so much generational wealth year after year, family after family, because we don't have the proper protections and systems in place, like your wills, like your trusts, you know, like your life insurance, et cetera. And so that was really the ultimate goal, is how can we kind of reach the masses? And, you know, obviously we wanted it to also funnel into the business, which it does, but I just really wanted him to not talk to me at the end of the day.
in a very loving
So,
manner.
Yeah.
right. Well, so Brandon, let's talk a little bit about just, I know you work with your clients on their financial goals and systems, and you guys have a dream framework that we're going to get into, but maybe, and then maybe this is the time to do it, but what for you are just the key, if you can give a couple of like foundational things that you tell your clients that they need to do or get it together. I think Jessica, you brought some of those stuff up with like the will and but other like what are some things that you are like seeing when people come to you and you're just like this is like step one, like we need to do this to help you get started.
Step one, and it's a universal one, and it's very easy, is that you need to spend less than you make. That's the very basis because it doesn't matter how amazing the plan is, doesn't matter how much money you make. If you're spending more money than you're bringing in, that is a recipe for failure. So whenever I sit down with someone and they're already great savers, I already know that like more than 50% of my battle is done because if you can, save money and you're really good at that, all you really need is just someone to help you put the plan into place and maybe, provide you with a little bit more information. But as Americans, we're terrible savers in comparison to other first world countries. We're terrible savers. So number one to be saving. And as far as when it comes to, if I'm sitting down with a couple, is they don't have conversations with each other. So I might sit down with a couple and I'm asking them, what are your goals? What are your goals as an individual? What are your goals as a couple? They have no idea. They've never talked about it. They may have thought about it in their mind, but I don't think even if they thought about it, they didn't think about it in the detail that we talk about it. So sometimes I'm sitting down and you have one spouse, talking about a goal. And while I'm hearing it for the first time, so is their partner. So I think that's also a really big issue that people have is they don't have enough conversations with each other.
So is it as simple as like so depending on if it's just one partner listening to this, right? Going to your partner and saying, "What are your goals?" Like you're like I mean like are there some prompts because I can imagine too that some people are just like, "Well, like I've thought I tried to ask this question, this person's not really opening up." We all come with our money baggage and our life stories in relationships, but like are there any prompts or ways to get that conversation flowing?
There definitely are prompts because I also think that people don't actually structure their goals properly. So one of the biggest, one of the most common themes that I have is I'm sitting down with somebody and asking them about their goals. They have a monetary value as a goal, like, oh, I wanna have $1 million, I wanna have $2 million, and I'm always of the mindset that money, a monetary amount is not a goal because money's not a goal. Money's a tool, and once you understand that money's a tool, then you actually start to use it properly. What is that $1 million going to allow you to do? What is that $2 million going to allow you to do? Is it going to allow you to, become work optional and take 6 or 10 vacations a year? Is it going to buy you that lake house? Is it going to buy you that beach house? Is it going to provide you being able to take these vacations with your kids and spend more time and make memories? So you got to figure out what the money is going to do because the money itself is not the goal. Nobody's like, I just want to have $10 million and not do anything with it.
That's a good point. I do think that a lot of it is focused on just the number amount, but it's almost like I want to say cop out, but it's just like an easy, like just throw a number out there without really thinking, well, wait, like what do you want to do? And sometimes like the number, you don't need that much to do what you want to do.
Exactly.
Like sometimes you do, depending on what I call guac levels and like your
Yeah.
desired lifestyle. But sometimes it's just like, oh, so you want to be able to do that? Well, you can actually do that a lot earlier with a lot less money. So let's help you figure that out.
Yeah. We've had people on the podcast who said that exact thing, right? The goal was X dollars, right? I want to make my first million. And then they realized that their life really didn't change drastically from five or $600,000 to $1 million, which I understand the privilege of even saying like only 500,000 or only 600,000. I don't want to diminish that is an extreme amount of wealth, right? However, how much more time did you spend away from your family, from your friends, doing what you truly love to get that extra $400,000? And was it worth it? And in most cases, they end up saying, I didn't need the $1 million. I just, quote unquote, needed the 500,000 or the 300,000. And then my life significantly improved at that time because I was able to get a housekeeper, get a driver for my kids, get a cook to make us healthy family meals so we're not eating out as much. Whatever it might be, again, your goals are your own, but really understanding that the number behind it, like you said, can usually be reached much quicker. And what sacrifice are you making just to say, well, I made 300,000. I made 1 million, right? Like, what did you sacrifice in the process, and was it worth it? And oftentimes it's not.
I say most people have a common goal of they want their time back. They want their time and freedom to do what they want to do. That is
A
the
lazy
common
Tuesday
that is the
morning.
common theme now. Obviously, what you do at that time that varies, but most people just want the freedom to have the time to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
That's what I think too. I think ultimately it's just this idea of we want our control over our energy and our time. And so many of us don't have that when we're working for other people, even working in our own businesses, as you know, Brandon, right? Because it does require you to show up. And so with that, this ability and getting people to understand like the importance of, like you said, money being a tool to get you what you want, and then knowing that and realizing too that I always like to say like money is literally made up. They print it and they can print as much of it as they want. Like, you know, when I'm always just even with interest rates and like how depending on interest rate, like someone with the same mortgage amount is paying different such a different a monthly mortgage just based on the rate, which, you know, is decided by so many factors. And just realizing that I think can be hard, right? Because if you're growing up in an environment where money is everything, like then that is the goal versus not understanding like, wait a second, like what do I actually want to do to bring my value or work into this world, and how do I want to live? I think are the things we should be spending more time learning about ourselves so we can make those decisions.
Yeah. And each other. I think what you asked a few minutes ago about like, well, how do I just show up to my partner, and how do I just say, all right, let's talk about money? That's really difficult. And I think, you know, you and I and Brandon, we're in this world of like constantly talking about money because that's what we do. We do it online, we do it on the podcast. So for us, it's normal. And our goal was to normalize these money conversations, but it's still very taboo to talk about money, to talk about your income, to talk about that bonus, to talk about what's your mortgage? What's your mortgage rate? I mean, those are the conversations that we need to have in order to level up, but they're very difficult. And so as Brandon was sharing, you know, he'll never share details about his clients, but he'll say, hey, I had a couple today, and you could just see they were not on the same page, right? And so one of the things that we wanted to help people with is to have the conversations and to normalize the conversations about money in their homes. And we wanted to take it away from that monetary goal because, again, it's not the goal, it's just a tool. So what we figured out is that what couples seem to be lacking is that grand vision for their lives. They really are not dreaming big together. And so that's where the dream framework came from. We want you to dive, that's the D. So we want you to dive into your past, really understand, why are you the way you are with money? What feelings do you have when you talk about money, when you pay your bills, when you open your mail on a Tuesday? Do you have anxiety? Why is that? What did you hear your parents and your family members saying about money? Are you coming into this relationship with a scarcity mindset, a mindset of abundance? It's very common for couples to not have the same background with money, right? You might have somebody who came from extreme poverty and built themselves out of that. And you might have somebody who, came from wealth. You have people who, I had $100,000 in student loan debt coming into our relationship. Brandon had no student loans. That was a conversation we needed to have. And so really digging into and diving into understanding, why am I how I am and why do I feel the way I feel? Next, you're going to reflect. How is that showing up in your life today? Because that money, whether it's abundance or scarcity, we all have some sort of trauma. How is it showing up, right? Is it showing up when you have a scarcity mindset and you're holding on to all your money and you're hoarding it? Or did you have a scarcity mindset and you're like, if I don't spend it, it's somebody else is going to take it, so I might as well spend it all? I mean, one thing, scarcity mindset, for example, could show up in your life in very different ways. And so really reflecting on, how does it show up in my life, in my relationship, and how can I better control these feelings and these emotions? Next, you're going to engage. This is the fun part. This is where you and your partner engage with each other to understand, what are your dreams? He gets to have separate dreams from me, but we also need to have dreams for our family, right? Now, if you're dating, this works. If you've been married for 25 years, this works. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship you're in. If you're in a partnership, you should be dreaming together and you should understand your partner's goals. And we don't want you to just say, hey, next summer we want to go to Greece. That's boring. We want you to dream in detail. We want the specifics. Get into the nitty gritty. What month? Where are you going to stay? How are you going to fly? How are you going to get there? Who's going to pick you up from the airport? What kind of food are you going to eat? How long is this trip going to be? What do you want to see? Everything. What are you going to wear to dinner the first night? Have that big, big, big grand vision for all of those dreams and do it in detail. Write it down, communicate it often, because that is what you're going to come back to when maybe one partner wants to spend money on something. Like I always say, I want the accent wall. I love an accent wall. But Brandon can say, hey, do we need to spend $1,600 on that accent wall right now? Or is Jamaica for Christmas next Christmas more important to you? And that goes back to our family goals and visions, which is spending meaningful time with our children and helping them see the world. So I'm always going to choose, all right, we're going to save for that trip, and the accent wall can wait. So that engage portion and dreaming big, that's going to help you stay rooted in your goals when things get hard. Because let's be serious, the money is going to money. It's going to come, it's going to go, and it's not always a fun conversation. That's the black and white numbers. There are important things, right? Like Brandon said, don't spend more than you have. But it's that vision that's going to keep you inspired to keep going. Then we have act. You have to manage the money, right? You have to put a plan in place to actually reach these goals, because otherwise they're literally just dreams. So that's when you talk about, how do we want to manage money? Do we want to put everything into one pot and then take it out to pay the bills? Do we want to do this based on a percentage? How are we going to, make sure that our lights stay on, our water stays hot, etc.? You get to make those rules. You need to decide. This is how you decide, hey, when we show up every month for our money meeting, how do we want to do it? Are we old school pen and paper? Do we want to use an app? Do we want to use an Excel spreadsheet? Do you have anything in mind? This is where you get specific on understanding, well, how are you going to actually manage your money? So you're taking action to put a plan in place so that you actually have a framework to follow so that things don't fall through the cracks. And then the last step is managing that, right? This is ongoing. You're going to make more money. You're going to lose money. You're going to have unexpected bills. You're going to buy the house. You're going to have the baby.
Goals will change.
The goals will change. You have to have this conversation ongoing, right? We would say monthly, if not quarterly, I think is the least amount of time that you should be kind of having these conversations and tracking your budget, tracking your spend. But you need to manage the goals and the conversation and how you act to actually execute. And so that manage portion is really important, because you want to make sure that you have a system in place that works for you. How do you like to operate? How do you like to communicate? Is a Friday night for a date night and a money meeting, does that make sense? Or are you exhausted by Friday night and maybe you can do a Sunday morning? Again, whatever that looks like for you, you get to make the rules. But we think this is a really good framework for people to get started, to get that empathy, to get that context of why my partner is the way they are with money. And then how is it affecting our life and showing up in our life together?
I also always say that, putting a plan in place is great, but you need to be more focused on the action of planning, because like she said, things are going to change. And so you're always going to be ready to, make those changes and pivot as, life happens.
Because life be life. And
It does. It sure is. And I think, so dream, right? Like, yeah, the first three letters were more not action oriented. Like it's, you have to put some effort into thinking, and that takes a lot of emotional work. So it's not that does not take work. I think actually that's the harder work, is to dig into your past and to be honest about your dreams and reflect. And then, like you said, engage with each other to really get to the root of things. But it's like the last two that people usually just want to jump to. It's like the tangible stuff. I also talk about this. I talked about this in my book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom. Like there's these intangible things and tangible things. There's a lot of work that you can do without the physical doing, meaning like you're calling, you don't have to call the bank right away or negotiate with your boss right away. You don't have to go in tomorrow and work and do that right away. There's all these other things that you need to do. But what happens with people, and it still happens with me or most people I know, is that because of that emotional and mental load, it does take a lot to get started. But the benefits, once you start, like you'll be able to make the progress you want to see on the action items, not necessarily faster, but it's more sustainable. You're more rooted in like what it is that you want to do because you did the upfront work properly first.
Yeah, it's more efficient because how are you going to put a plan in place if you don't know what the end goal is going to, you want what you want actually want the end goal to be? So when you start with the planning without talking about, the first, the D, the R, the E, it's not going to be efficient at all because more than likely you might end up at a destination, but it's nowhere where you want it to be because you didn't do the work the harder work to begin with.
Yeah. You also want to understand where your partner is coming from. Why do they feel the way they do? Why do they resist when you ask for XYZ? Why do they always order the appetizer? Why do they never order the appetizer? I mean, it's the silly little things that when you put the context around their emotions and their feelings and their background with money and finances that will help you understand why they are the way they are. And that is what you need in order to execute on those goals. You need that context and understanding.
It also allows you to provide, empathy as far as like she's saying, why is your partner doing certain things and getting that insight and allowing, for the negative things room to grow, but then also looking at the good things that they're doing and continuing those.
And
I like that
celebrating
you brought
those.
right. I like that you brought up empathy because I recently had a conversation with someone and they reflected that they didn't when they were growing up they could never like go out to eat. It was not something that their parents could afford. So when they go out to eat now, there is a sense of pride that they're able to order what they want. And then I'm thinking there's a lot of people who probably had that experience. Like they were so limited in their childhood and they couldn't do what they want. And now they're working so hard. And isn't this why I work? So I could go out and get the
Yeah.
damn guacamole.
Yeah.
So it's like you
It's
kind
so
of like,
true.
and so because you might have a different upbringing where you're just like, I can say no to the appetizer and guacamole because that trip to Jamaica, okay, means more. And then you don't understand why your partner can't say no to that in the moment. And for them, though, that means so much because it's all that, past childhood that it's bringing that up. So,
It's so funny that you mentioned that because that's actually a conversation we've had because we very rarely went out to eat growing up, but when we did, everybody got water. You did not get the appetizer, you did not get the dessert, and if my dad got, more than one beer, he was about to get a side eye from my mom, right? So that is my memory, and I just remember growing up being like, "Ah, what's the point of even going out to dinner if you're not going to enjoy it?" And so Brandon knows I would rather stay at home and eat chips and salsa out of a jar than go out to dinner and be restricted, right? If I want the app, we're going to get the app. If I want the cocktail, I'm going to get the cocktail. If he wants the molten chocolate lava cake at the end, he gets the chocolate lava cake at the end. If we're going to dinner, we're going to dinner. If we're going to have restriction, we're going to stay home because I don't want to do it halfway. And again, that's 100% straight from my childhood, right? That's something that I observed and I said, we're not going to do it this way. So I'd rather stay home and not do it at all than to do it with, okay, don't forget, you can only get the water today, or no, that's an $11.99 appetizer. We're not going to do that. That is not how I want to go out and enjoy my dinner. But those are the conversations. They seem so silly, but that's how you get to know your partner. That's how you start to understand why they are the way they are and why they operate that way. So it's really, you should feel excited about getting to know your partner in this intimate way that's just not common, having those conversations. What were the holidays like? What was Christmas like? Did you only do stocking stuffers? Did you get socks and underwear? Or did you get the light up tricycle? Like whatever it is, understanding, hey, my partner wants to go overboard and go into debt for Christmas because he never had the huge Christmas morning and that's now what he wants to provide his kids. Like we are rooted, whether we like it or not, in our money traumas and experiences. So you might as well dig in and get ahead of it.
I mean, also too, even from like a planning standpoint, for example, as she had mentioned earlier, she had student loans. I didn't. I had some scholarships, but the remaining amount that was owed, my mom paid. And, that was a difference of upbringing and difference of initial opinion because when we first started talking about it, just was like, well, they could just take out student loans. And I was like, I would prefer that we pay for it so they don't have to worry about that. And that's having a conversation and then coming to an agreement on how you are going to do it together. But that difference of opinion is initially based in the difference of our upbringings.
and what I just love about the human experience is that you can literally have a similar upbringing to someone, but take away and want to do something opposite. So you could have, Jessica said, well, I definitely want to help pay for college because I didn't have that. And you could have been the opposite, Brandon, like, well, so I just think it's so, even if you had a similar experience, like you as a human put your own lens on it, and then you have the ability to act in the way that, makes your life, which I think is just so
Absolutely.
interesting, which is why still the conversations and the empathy and understanding needs to be there as a couple to talk through these scenarios and these situations to get to a common ground. And the other thing is too, like we were talking about, maybe not deciding to do something because of that goal that's further out. And sometimes you might say, you know what, in the season of life that I'm in and how I'm feeling, even though I do want to go on the vacation, I rather have these everyday or more often occurring experiences that pour into me. So maybe the vacation this year doesn't work. I think the problem for most people, or some people, is that they still want to do both. Like there's still no like, okay, so if we're gonna do it this way, then we gotta be more realistic about that goal that we are taken away from. And then because their things are not clear and they don't like have their money in front of them, like knowing what needs to happen, it's like, no, but why can't we just do both? And it's like, you don't have enough money to do both. And that's why we're going to be in this situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to ground yourself back in the numbers. I mean, again, nobody wants to look at the numbers, but if you're not looking at them, you're never going to reach your goals. You have to understand what you just said, Jamila. You're going to have to sacrifice something. If you can do the accent wall and the trip to Jamaica, good for you. Love that for you. Most of us, especially in this economy, are going to have to sacrifice something. So you have to go back to your goals and say, well, is my kids growing up with an accent wall more important, or is my kids growing up with memories and traveling the world more important? For us, and again, there's no wrong answer. For us, it's our kids traveling the world and having those experiences with us. So we're going to always lean back into travel.
And for me, I'd be like, it's mom and dad that want to enjoy the accent wall. You kids can like, wait, no, but that's that's good. So Jessica and Brandon, please tell everyone more about the podcast, like, the topics you discuss, where they can find it, and then more about where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, so at the Sugar Daddy Podcast on all channels. We also have a YouTube and a newsletter. We drop episodes the first 3 Wednesdays of every month. We have solo episodes for him and I, as well as lots of guests. So we have incredible guests on the podcast talking about estate planning, prenups, bankruptcy, student loan attorneys coming up in the new year, everything from entrepreneurship and business to how to, be a single mom and still plan for retirement. I mean, we really, again, want to normalize just any conversation around money, building wealth, and setting yourself up for a fantastic work optional life if that's what you're going for.
Yeah, and I would say our primary target is the elder millennial. So think about anything as an elder millennial, any issues that you're facing that have some type of monetary aspect to them. We try to cover all of them.
Absolutely.
By the way, settle this for me. What is the elder millennial? What age is that?
Yeah, so our target demographic and what we see on our surveys and things are 35 to 44 is kind of our age bracket. The elder millennial, I was born in 85. He's born in 83. I think technically it goes down to 1990. So, or up to 1990 as a millennial. But again, we're on that other spectrum where we're creeping into that Gen X generation. So,
yeah, I guess I'm an elder millennial too. All right.
Welcome
This
to
is
the
great.
club.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'll link all the links in the show notes.
Thank
Thank you for
Jamila.
having us.